May we share with you how amazing our children are?
We try not to brag on them too
quick
much,
parent
but
bragging
every once in a
moment.
while.
When we head out on vacation next week, to either bike or kayak in the rain, they are going to come and stay and babysit our dog. It's so wonderful. It was Father's Day last week, Mother's Day a little bit before, and for a combo Father's Day, they took us to go see Cirque du Soleil with them. It was wonderful. And I still have a Father's Day card from years ago that our daughter made. It was a cool abstract watercolor on the front, and on the inside she wrote, "Happy Father's Day, Dad. Thank you for being the most kind, compassionate dad ever." Did you hear that? You hear that? "I love you so much. Thanks for pumping up bike tires, vacuuming, helping me out all the time, and just always being there for me."
I think you'll have that your whole life.
Sniff. So, just for the record, I would like to state quite unequivocally that I am less than happy. No, I am vexed, miffed, even chagrined with Jesus' unsubtle pronouncements in today's reading from Matthew's Gospel. Thanks a lot, Adam. "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Jesus, really? I mean, I love you, JC. I really do. But did you see the card my daughter made me? Exactly what good does it do anyone to say whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me? How does it benefit my family to read, "I have not come to bring peace, but a sword"? I've come to set a man against his father and a daughter against her mother. What happened to peace and love and family values and all that stuff? What's going on in this reading here?
I think what's going on here is that Jesus is telling us to prioritize things in our lives, to prioritize the important things in our lives, and doing it in a far more radical way than we're really comfortable with. I think that most of us comfortable Christians, myself included, we deal with the gospel the same way we deal with those online software agreements. You sort of scroll right through it and hit "I agree" at the bottom without actually having read what you've just agreed to. And I often joke that I might have just said that someone could have my firstborn because I didn't pay attention to the fine print. When we click "I agree" to the gospel, we aren't promising to sell off our firstborn. We are agreeing, though, to love until it hurts, and to love even our enemies. We're agreeing to forgive 7 times, 70 times. We're agreeing to take up our crosses, and none of this is in the fine print. It's in the bold print. In today's lesson, where it seems the writer of Matthew's Gospel has taken a whole bunch of Jesus' wisdom sayings and put them together into one reading about discipleship, it lays it out clearly. And for those early followers, and for us, following Jesus means making choices. And sometimes those choices disrupt relationships and families and society.
Imagine you're living in the year 85 or so, about the time Matthew's Gospel was being written. If you grew up in a Jewish or Roman family around that time, and you became a member of the infant church, what was called the Way at the time, Jesus became a sharp instrument that could split that family wide open. A brother could report you to the synagogue authorities and have you kicked out. A mother could report you to the Roman authorities and have you jailed. You met at night, surreptitiously, with other Christians to avoid arrest. But, as Jesus said, what I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. To be a Christian in the first century was intensely disruptive to what had been a completely normal family life. And if your allegiance to family, or to Roman patriotism, or to institutional religion was greater than your allegiance to Christ, you were not going to be able to hack it. Authentic discipleship could cost you your reputation, your standing in the community, your family, even your life in the late first century. Jesus' dire warnings were the natural consequence of saying yes to the cost of discipleship. Saying yes to following in the path of love that Jesus laid out did not bring peace in a keep everyone happy sort of way. The love that Jesus called us to live challenged Rome's traditional social structure and family values. It brought a sword, a razor-sharp blade of decision-making. What is going to be central in my life?
Our colleague Steve Garnis-Holmes wrote about it this way. He said, "It's not a sword of conflict or violence. It's the cutting edge of making choices, splitting what you choose from what you don't choose. And making your choices will set you apart from others, even friends and family. This is the work of becoming your own self," Steve writes. Authentic discipleship can cause splits and friction today, too, just as it did in the first century, in big ways and in little ways. What if your daughter, because she follows Jesus, is the only person in school to stand up and defend and befriend a transgendered student who's being bullied?
What if your son, because he follows Jesus, is denied college financial aid because he became a conscientious objector?
What if the person in the pew next to you, because they follow Jesus, gets arrested for taking part in a climate change protest?
What if your pastor, because he's trying to follow Jesus, is found transporting government-confiscated computers across the Canadian border bound for Methodist healthcare centers in Cuba?
No, that's just hypothetical.
Purely hypothetical,
Really.
I swear. Making choices makes families, communities, and churches look long and hard at what is central to them. And sometimes, even today, that can split families and churches and communities apart. We witnessed that at the annual conference a few weeks ago, when more than a dozen churches in our conference who could no longer live with the radically inclusive love of the gospel disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church. That is the sword. That is the unpeace that Jesus warns about. That is the great cost of saying yes to authentic discipleship. And Jesus wants us to know what we're getting into.
But saying yes isn't just about pain and suffering, though sometimes. It's also about living in love and living without fear, because we know where our hope lies, and that is steady and unmovable. It's an invitation into a deeper relationship with each other and with God and with Jesus, even in the midst of troubles, even in the midst of all these hard sayings. Jesus assures his disciples that God is the one whose eyes are on the sparrow, who counts the very hairs on our heads. Not a tear will be shed that God will not wipe away. Not a joy will happen that God will not share. As Paul writes in Romans, if we've been united with Christ in a death like Christ's, we are certainly united with Christ in a resurrection like Christ's. So listen to this true story about Clarence Jordan, who was the founder of Koinonia, a deliberately Christian community in Sumter,
He also helped
Georgia.
form Habitat for Humanity.
That's right. Jordan knew the difficulty of creating a diverse worshiping community anywhere, really, especially in the South. And one Sunday he was visiting an integrated church, and he was surprised to find a relatively large church full of not only black and white folk, also rich and poor folk.
This was back in the 1950s, which that wasn't done in the South. It was dangerous to do in the South.
And one could argue it doesn't happen a lot today either, right? After the service, Jordan went up to the pastor, who was an old hillbilly preacher, and said, "How did your church get this way?"
And the old hillbilly preacher said, "What way?"
Well, black and white folk all together, integrated. Is it because of the recent Supreme Court decision?
Supreme Court? Why would Christians need the Supreme Court to tell us black folk and white folk ought to be together?
So how did it happen?
And the old preacher said, "Well, there used to be about 20 people in this church. When the old preacher died, they couldn't get no one to preach. So after about 2 months, I told the deacons that I'd preach. They couldn't get anybody else, so they said yes. I got up the next Sunday, opened the Bible, put my finger down on the verse that says, 'In Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, but all are one in Jesus Christ,' Colossians 3:11. So I preached on that. I told them how Jesus makes all kinds of people one. When I finished, the deacons said they wanted to talk to me in the back room. When they got there, they told me they didn't want to hear that kind of preaching no more.
So what did you do?
I fired them deacons. If a man's not going to deek, he ought to be fired."
Clarence Jordan was astounded. Why didn't they fire you?
They didn't hire me, so they couldn't fire me. You know, once I found out what bothered these people, I gave it to them week after week. I put the knife in the same place Sunday after Sunday.
And they put up with it?
Not really. I preached that church down to 4 people. Sometimes revival happens not only when people come in, but when people go out. If people were going to stand in the way of the moving of the Spirit of God, it's better they be gone. After that, we decided that we were going to build the church on people who were serious about following Jesus. And that's when it started to grow.
I preached that church down to 4. That's not our plan for Harvard-Epworth. And it's not our usual advice to churches about evangelism or successful church growth, and yet there's a truth in that story. A good description of how disruptive the gospel can be and how it's a knife, maybe, or a sword that cuts before it makes healing possible. And what happens when you build a church on the people who are serious about following Jesus, as that preacher said?
We are not saying this is easy. And we're not saying to just ignore disruption that faithful discipleship can cause, or to write off those who don't agree or who don't understand why we're making the choices we make when we follow Jesus.
To really live in love, to really live without fear, means recognizing and acknowledging that discomfort, anticipating that that discomfort is going to come, and not letting it get in the way of us being faithful. We might be nervous about the consequences that we think may come and pained by the disruption, but we live in God's expansive and inclusive love anyway. It's what Maggie Kuhn, who was founder of the Grey Panthers, said when she said, "Speak truth, even if your voice shakes." We may be nervous. We might fear the disruption.
And Jesus promises that even in the disruption, we will also find life in him. Amen.